I still remember the exact words she used, leaning back against the kitchen counter, sipping red wine like it was nothing. "It's just sex, Adam. Don't be so dramatic." She smiled, that same dismissive, smug smile I'd grown used to over the years. Kelly had this way of making everything sound like my fault for caring too much. Maybe I did. Maybe I was stupid for even agreeing to it. It started as a joke. One of those half-drunken conversations couples have at parties when the room's too loud, and someone throws out the idea of open marriages like it's trendy. But Kelly didn't let it go. 2 weeks later, she brought it up again, then again after that. "I'm just curious," she'd say, eyes scanning her phone whenever she thought I wasn't looking. "Don't you ever think about it? Exploring things with other people?" I told her the truth. No, that wasn't good enough. So I caved. We laid out rules. Not that she planned to follow any of them. No one we know. No one in the house. I could have written them on paper and set them on fire for all the difference it made. The neighbor moved in 3 months later. I remember the exact moment I saw him. I was mowing the lawn, sweating under the Texas sun, when I caught Kelly standing by the fence, twisting her hair in that way she only did when she wanted attention. He was younger than me, probably mid-30s. Tall, dark hair, sharp jaw. The kind of guy that didn't have to try. I'd like to say I hated him immediately, but I didn't. Not at first. His name was Eric. Kelly didn't even try to hide it. Started subtle. A touch too long at the mailbox. Random disappearances when I got home. Her phone screen lighting up just a little too often. "You're imagining things?" she told me one night when I found her sitting on the patio, staring at his house. The light from his bedroom window flickered, and I swear I saw her smirk. Maybe I should have confronted her sooner, but I wasn't ready for the answer. I caught them 2 weeks later. I wasn't even trying to catch her. I left work early because of a busted water pipe at the office, figuring I'd surprise her with takeout from that overpriced Italian place she liked. Her car was gone, but his wasn't. The curtain in the upstairs bedroom shifted when I stepped inside the house. I almost thought I was crazy until I heard them. Noises. Their noises. It felt like someone slammed a fist through my stomach. I didn't go upstairs. Couldn't. I walked straight back out, got in my car, and drove for 2 hours, just circling random streets until the fuel light came on. When I finally came home, she was in the shower, humming. I never told her I knew. Not that day. I sat at the kitchen table while she acted like nothing happened. She kissed me on the cheek, said something about trying a new recipe next week, then scrolled through her phone like I didn't exist. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I made coffee, sat across from her, and said the words that would destroy everything. "I think we should stop this. The open thing. It's not working for me." She didn't look up from her phone. "Yeah? Why?" "Why? Because you're screwing the guy next door. Because I heard you. Because I hate him. And I hate you for pretending nothing's wrong." But I didn't say any of that. I just shrugged. "I changed my mind. I don't want to do this anymore." She glanced up finally, meeting my eyes. Her lips twitched, like she was fighting the urge to laugh. "Is this about Eric?" There it was. She didn't even blink when she said his name. I felt the blood drain from my face, but I didn't let her see it.
"No, primelit.
It's about us. I just don't think it's healthy." She smiled again, setting her phone down with a soft click. "Adam, you're overthinking this. Eric and we're just having fun. It's not like I'm leaving you. Not yet." I didn't argue. Not that day. Instead, I started watching Eric closer. And that's when things stopped making sense. Eric was too perfect. He was polite, friendly, overly friendly. He'd wave every morning when I grabbed the mail, ask about my work, offer to help with yard stuff. He acted like someone who wanted to be liked. But then, strange things started happening. One day, I came home to find the garage door wide open. I never left it open. Another time, our dog got out, and I found him sitting on Eric's porch, eating leftovers like he'd been fed there before. The worst was the phone call. Kelly's number popped up late at night, but when I answered, I only heard breathing. Slow, deliberate. I thought it was a mistake until Eric's voice whispered, How's that open marriage working out for you? He hung up. I didn't tell Kelly, but I started digging. And what I found changed everything. Eric wasn't just some random guy. I knew him, or at least I should have. 10 years ago, I was involved in a legal case, one of those civil disputes over land. Nothing violent. Nothing personal. I barely remembered the details. But someone lost everything. His father. I pieced it together after finding an old newspaper clipping in Eric's trash. His last name wasn't even Parker. That's what it said on the mailbox. It was Lawson. The same name from the case. Eric wasn't here by accident. And he wasn't just sleeping with my wife. He was planning something. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to Kelly's slow, even breaths beside me. Her phone was charging on the nightstand, face down. I wanted to look, but I didn't. Instead, I replayed Eric's voice in my head. The way he whispered like he already owned everything. Morning came too fast. Kelly kissed me on the cheek before heading out, saying something about brunch with her sister. She didn't have a sister. I waited 10 minutes, then followed her. Her car turned left at the intersection. Mine turned right. I drove straight to Eric's house. There was no hesitation when I walked up his driveway. No second guessing. I knocked once. He opened the door almost immediately, like he'd been expecting me.
Adam.
His face was calm, but I could see the flicker of amusement in his eyes. He was enjoying this. Where is she? I asked. He didn't even pretend to misunderstand. His lips curved into a small, smug smile as he leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. Not here. I pushed past him before he could stop me. I didn't care. The house was clean. Too clean. Not a single personal item out of place. No photos, no clutter, just bare walls and furniture that looked like it belonged in a catalog. You really thought I'd bring her here? His voice followed me as I stepped into the kitchen. I was losing control. I grabbed a glass from his sink and smashed it against the counter. It shattered instantly. This isn't a game, Eric. He didn't flinch. Oh, it is. But you're playing the wrong part. His words hit harder than I expected. I turned to face him, breathing hard. I know who you are. I know about your father. For the first time, Eric's smile faded. I thought I saw something flash in his eyes. Anger, maybe, but it was gone too fast to be sure. Good, he said softly. It's better if you know. Is this revenge? You think screwing my wife makes us even? He stepped closer, so close I could smell the faint trace of cologne. Screwing her? Adam, I'm not just screwing her. His voice was a knife, twisting deeper with every word. She tells me things. About you. About your marriage. She laughs when she talks about how you can't satisfy her anymore. Did you know that? I clenched my fists. You're lying. He shrugged. Maybe. But it's working, isn't it? I left before I did something I couldn't take back. But as I walked down his driveway, I heard him call out. She'll be here tonight, Adam. Just like last week. And the week before that. I didn't look back. Kelly didn't mention brunch when she got home. She kissed me like nothing happened. Like she hadn't been gone for hours. I stared at her, wondering how much of what Eric said was true. Was she laughing at me behind my back? I needed proof. That night, I told Kelly I had a late work meeting. She barely looked up from her phone. Okay, don't wait up. I left the house at 7 p.m. but didn't go far. I parked down the street, headlights off, watching Eric's house. At 8:13, Kelly walked out the front door. She wasn't wearing anything special, just jeans and a black sweater, but I recognized those heels. The same ones she wore when we used to go out on dates. Before Eric. She didn't even check if I was home. By 8:20, her car was in Eric's driveway. I sat there for over an hour, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. At 9:45, the bedroom light flickered on. I don't remember driving home. The next morning, Kelly acted like nothing happened. She hummed as she made coffee, scrolling through her phone like always. I wanted to scream. How was brunch? I asked instead. She didn't even hesitate. Good. Allison says hi. She didn't have a sister. I stared at her, wondering how long she'd been lying to my face. But Eric was wrong about one thing. I wasn't playing the wrong part. I just hadn't started yet. That night, everything changed. Kelly left for yoga around 7 p.m. I didn't follow her this time. I already knew where she was going. Instead, I grabbed her laptop from the living room. She never bothered setting a password. She didn't think she needed to. It didn't take long to find the messages. Her conversations with Eric were buried under random emails and shopping confirmations, but they were there. Long threads of text stretching back months. I scrolled through them, heart hammering in my chest. I told him I was going out with Allison. He didn't even question it. Of course he didn't. He trusts you. That's his problem. He shouldn't. Winky face. See you tonight? Always. I kept reading. There were photos. Some were innocent enough, pictures of the backyard, the pool. But then, further down, explicit. I shut the laptop so hard I thought I cracked the screen. I didn't care. She came home late, slipping through the front door like she was trying not to wake me. I was sitting in the dark, waiting. Her eyes flicked to the couch, but she didn't flinch. Hey, she whispered. You're up late. Yeah. Couldn't sleep. I could feel the lies hanging between us. She hesitated by the stairs.
I'm gonna shower.
Sure. I listened to the water run, gripping the phone in my hand. Her texts with Eric stared back at me. I was shaking, but not from sadness. Not anymore. I wanted her to suffer. The next day, I made the first move. I waited until Kelly left for work, then walked straight to Eric's house. He opened the door, same cocky smirk as always. Adam, he greeted, stepping aside. What brings you by? I didn't answer. I walked past him, straight to his kitchen, and set the phone down on his table. You're done, I said quietly. Eric raised an eyebrow, leaning against the counter. Done? I pulled up the messages, scrolling slowly. His eyes narrowed as he realized what he was looking at. Kelly didn't tell you I had access to her laptop, did she? His jaw tightened. Got him. I can ruin you, Eric. Asterisk. I stepped closer, voice low. One email. One screenshot to your job, her family, hell, even mine. You think she's gonna protect you when this gets out? He didn't answer. Stay away from her, or I blow it up. For the first time, Eric looked nervous. I left without waiting for a response. That night, Kelly noticed. She was scrolling through her phone at dinner when her face twisted in confusion. Weird, she muttered. I kept eating. What's weird? Eric hasn't texted back. Usually, he replies fast. I shrugged. Maybe he's busy. I watched her carefully. She shifted uncomfortably, tapping her screen. She was worried. Good. Let it sink in. But Eric wasn't as smart as I thought. The next morning, I found a note slipped under our front door.
No envelope.
Just scrawled handwriting on plain paper. You think you're in control. You're not. Watch your back, Adam. I crumpled it in my fist. You wanted to play games? Fine. I could play dirtier. That night, I sat on the couch next to Kelly, phone in hand. You talked to Eric today? I asked casually. She glanced at me, frowning. No, not really. Why? No reason. Just wondering if he mentioned his wife. Her head snapped up. His what? Oh, he didn't tell you? I said, eyes locked on the TV. Weird. I met her yesterday. Silence. I could feel her staring at me. He's married. Her voice cracked. I shrugged. Guess he doesn't tell you everything. Let that burn, Kelly. She didn't speak for the rest of the night. Kelly didn't sleep that night. I could hear her turning over, restless, tugging the blankets every few minutes. She thought I was asleep, but I was wide awake. By morning, she was glued to her phone, typing furiously. I didn't ask who she was texting. I already knew. Eric wasn't responding. I poured myself a coffee, taking my time at the counter, waiting for her to crack. Did you mean what you said last night? She asked suddenly, not looking up. Yeah. Why? I stirred my drink slowly, watching her from the corner of my eye. She hesitated, biting her lip. I didn't know he was married. He never said anything. I nearly laughed. The way she said it, like she was the victim. Maybe you didn't ask the right questions, I said flatly. Her eyes snapped to me, narrowing. Don't be an ass, Adam. Don't fuck the neighbor, Kelly. I saw the color drain from her face. She opened her mouth, then shut it again, visibly biting back whatever insult she had lined up. Good. I wasn't in the mood for one of her gaslighting marathons. That afternoon, I went to Eric's house again. I didn't knock. I walked straight to the side gate, slipping into his backyard. If he wanted to play dirty, I'd show him how deep I could go. His kitchen lights were on, blinds partially open. Through the window, I saw him pacing with his phone to his ear. Kelly's name flashed on the screen. I watched him decline the call. His jaw was tight, shoulders stiff, he was rattled. Good. I didn't stick around. I left the way I came, careful not to leave any trace. Let him wonder if he saw me. Let him feel the paranoia creep in. By the time I got home, Kelly was sitting on the couch, arms crossed. We need to talk. I almost laughed. The cliché made her sound like a character in a bad movie. Sure, I said, sitting down across from her. She exhaled sharply, clearly bracing herself. I think maybe we should stop the open marriage thing. I stared at her, expression unreadable. Oh, she avoided my eyes. It's just, I don't think it's healthy for us. I thought it would be fun. But, you mean since Eric's not answering your calls anymore? I interrupted. She froze. For a second, I thought she'd deny it. But the fight in her eyes flickered out, like a match losing its flame. Yeah, she admitted softly. I think I got carried away. I leaned back, sipping my coffee. Carried away, I echoed. That's one way to put it. I'm trying here, Adam. Her voice sharpened. You wanted this too. There it was. She was still trying to pin this on me.
No, Kelly.
I didn't. She said nothing, just glared at me from across the room. But I saw it, the flicker of guilt. And for the first time in months, I had the upper hand. That night, I left the house. Kelly didn't ask where I was going. I drove aimlessly at first, winding through dark streets, before parking down the block from Eric's place. His car was in the driveway, but his lights were off. I waited. At 11:45, I saw movement. Eric stepped out onto his porch, checking his surroundings like he expected someone to jump out at him. I made sure he didn't see me. I let him feel the weight of my stare. This was just the beginning. The next morning, Kelly was gone before I woke up. No note, no text. I wasn't surprised. She was running. From me, from Eric, from the cracks she couldn't glue together fast enough. I let her go. By noon, Eric's house felt too quiet. I couldn't shake the feeling he was watching me this time. Fine. I gave him something to watch. I walked to his porch and knocked 3 times, loud enough for the whole street to hear. The door opened slowly, just enough for me to see his eyes. He didn't speak. You didn't think I'd stop, did you? I said, keeping my voice calm. Eric leaned against the doorframe, smirking, but I saw his grip tighten on the edge. I figured you'd get bored. Not yet. Silence stretched between us. I let him sweat, let him think I'd press charges, expose him to Kelly's family, burn his entire life down. She's not worth it, you know? He muttered, breaking the tension. I smiled, stepping closer. Neither are you. His jaw flexed, and for a second, I thought he might swing at me. But he didn't, because he knew I wasn't bluffing. Kelly came home late, creeping through the door like a teenager past curfew. I didn't look up from the TV. Rough day? I asked casually. Yeah. She tossed her keys onto the counter, avoiding eye contact. I turned the volume down. Where were you? She hesitated. Out. Out where? Her eyes narrowed slightly, scanning my face for cracks. Does it matter? It does if you're lying. Her expression hardened, lips pressing into a thin line. Caught. I wasn't with him, she snapped, as if that was the problem. I didn't flinch. Didn't ask if you were. Her shoulders dropped slightly, and for the first time I saw it, the tiny flicker of fear. She thought I was dangerous now. Good. Let her wonder what I knew. The next day, Eric's front lawn looked different. His car was gone. The blinds were drawn. He was hiding. I walked over, knocking louder than before. This time, no one answered. I wasn't sure if I was disappointed or satisfied. Maybe both. I left a note under his windshield wiper. One word. Run. That night, Kelly finally broke. She cornered me in the kitchen, slamming her phone down on the table. What the hell did you do to him? I blinked. Who? Don't play dumb, Adam. Eric. He's not answering his phone. I went by his house, and his car's gone. I met her glare with cold indifference. Maybe he got tired of married women. Her fists clenched, nails digging into her palms. You scared him off, didn't you? I thought you wanted to stop the open marriage, I said flatly. She stepped closer, invading my space, face inches from mine. I know what you're doing. Good, I whispered. Then you know what happens next. Her eyes flickered with doubt, and for the first time she backed down. She turned away, but I grabbed her wrist. If you ever lie to me again, I said, voice low, I won't stop at Eric. Her hand trembled slightly in mine. I let her go. She didn't say another word that night. By morning, Eric's house had a for sale sign in the yard. I smiled. Kelly didn't talk much after that. She moved around the house like a shadow, barely looking at me. Good. I preferred the silence. But even with Eric gone, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. His house sat empty, blinds drawn tight, but I felt him. Watching. Waiting. I'd already chased him out. What was he waiting for? A week passed. Kelly wasn't sleeping well. I could hear her shifting at night, twisting under the covers. The second she thought I was asleep, she slipped out of bed, phone in hand. She wasn't calling Eric. Not anymore. I checked the phone bill. No outgoing calls.
No texts.
But I caught her standing at the front window more than once, staring across the street at his empty house. 3 nights later, I heard a noise. It was past midnight when something thumped softly against the front door. I didn't move right away. I lay there, listening, waiting for it to happen again. Didn't. But when I opened the door, there was a small package on the front step. No return address. Kelly's name was written in black marker across the top. I brought it inside, locking the door behind me. Kelly? I called softly, setting the package on the counter. She appeared at the top of the stairs, wrapped in a blanket. Her eyes flicked to the box, and immediately, she froze. What is that? She asked quietly, voice tightening. I shrugged. It's for you. She didn't move. Her knuckles tightened around the railing, nails digging into the wood. Open it, I said, watching her carefully. She swallowed, stepping slowly into the kitchen. I could almost hear her heart pounding as she peeled back the tape. Her hands shook as she pulled out what was inside. Polaroid photo. Her and Eric. In our bed. I watched her face go pale as she stared down at it. Is this a joke? She whispered. I leaned closer, taking the photo from her trembling hand. There was something written on the back. Miss me. Eric's handwriting. He wasn't gone. Kelly didn't sleep at all that night. She sat curled up on the couch, knees to her chest, staring at the photo like it might burst into flames. I didn't comfort her. Let her sit in it. By morning, she was unraveling. Adam, he's messing with us, she said, pacing the living room. You saw the for sale sign. He left. Why would he do this? I didn't answer. I just watched her, quietly sipping my coffee. Say something, she snapped, glaring at me. What do you want me to say? She stopped pacing, running her hands through her hair. I don't know. I didn't think he'd. Her voice trailed off, but I caught the meaning. She didn't think Eric had the guts. She was wrong. The second package came 2 days later. This time, Kelly wouldn't open it. She just stared at it from across the room, shaking her head. I can't, she muttered. You do it. I didn't argue. I slit the box open, pulling out a USB drive. No label. Kelly stared at it like it might explode. Don't plug it in, she whispered. I did anyway. The screen flickered to life, grainy footage of our bedroom. The camera angle was low, hidden, probably wedged behind the dresser. Kelly sat on the edge of the bed in the video, sliding her sweater off her shoulders. Eric was beside her, his hand on her thigh. I felt her stiffen beside me, breath hitching. The video wasn't long, but it was enough. When it ended, the screen faded to black, replaced by 3 words. "This isn't over." Kelly backed away from the screen, shaking her head. "Adam, I swear I didn't know about that. I didn't know he..." "Stop talking." She flinched, but I wasn't looking at her anymore. I was watching the screen, memorizing every detail. Eric wanted a war. I give him one. Kelly tried to play the victim. She followed me around the house, pleading, her voice breaking every few words. "Adam, please, I didn't know he was recording. I swear. You have to believe me." I didn't respond. I just watched the clock, waiting for the right time. By evening, Kelly had retreated to the bedroom, locking the door behind her. Good. I needed her out of the way. At exactly 11:30 p.m., I stepped out the back door and crossed the yard. Eric's house sat in darkness. The for sale sign still stood by the curb, but I knew better. He was still inside. I walked to the side gate, slipping through without making a sound. A faint light glowed from the basement window. "Got you." I crouched low, watching the faint shadow pacing inside. He thought he was smart, thought he could hide, send his little threats, and control everything from behind the curtain. But he'd made one mistake. He was still here. I knocked softly, barely loud enough to carry. The shadow froze. I saw the blinds twitch as Eric peered out, just for a second. Then the front porch light flicked on. I waited. The door opened a crack, and Eric's face appeared, half hidden behind the frame.
Adam.
His voice was calm, but his eyes flickered with unease. "Nice night," I said flatly, stepping forward. Eric's grip tightened on the door. "What do you want?" I smiled. "You left something at my place." He stared at me for a long moment, jaw tight. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I think you do." I held up the USB drive, letting it catch the light. Eric's eyes darkened. "Where did you?" "You really should learn to wipe your fingerprints," I interrupted. "Sloppy." The color drained from his face. For the first time, he didn't have a comeback. "This isn't a game, Eric." I stepped closer, voice lowering. "You want to mess with me? Fine. But Kelly's done." His lips curled into a small smirk, but I saw the tension in his eyes. "You think you scare me?" "I don't care if I scare you," I said quietly. "I just want you to know. I'm watching. Just like you." Eric's smirk faded. I held his gaze for a long, uncomfortable moment before finally turning away. "Have a good night," I added over my shoulder. I didn't need to stay any longer. I planted the seed. By the time I got home, Kelly was still locked in the bedroom. I didn't check on her. Instead, I opened my laptop and started digging. I wasn't going to wait for Eric's next move. I was making mine first. I found what I needed by 3 a.m. Eric's real address. The house he'd inherited after his father's death sat across town. Completely empty.
No utilities registered.
No forwarding address. But his bank records told a different story. There were regular payments to a property management firm. Small amounts, just enough to keep a place off the market. I scrolled deeper, and that's when I found it. An old warehouse. Remote. Rented under his father's name. Bingo. The next morning I left early. I told Kelly I had meetings all day. She barely responded, still curled under the sheets. Perfect. I drove across town, following the address I'd found. The warehouse sat at the edge of an industrial park, surrounded by chain-link fencing and overgrown weeds. It looked abandoned. I parked across the street and watched for nearly an hour. Nothing. But I wasn't leaving empty-handed. I slipped through a gap in the fence, careful to stay low as I approached the side door. The lock was rusted, but the door creaked open with little effort. Inside, the place was empty, except for a single desk tucked into the corner. On top sat a laptop and a camera. I picked up the camera carefully, scrolling through the footage. My house. My wife. Some clips were weeks old. Others were from yesterday. I clenched the camera so tightly my knuckles turned white. Eric had been watching us the entire time. I copied everything onto a flash drive. This wasn't just leverage anymore. It was evidence. I wasn't going to stop until I'd buried him. I left the warehouse as the sun began to set, the weight of Eric's camera heavy in my hand. This wasn't just about an affair anymore. It was obsession. I could feel it. The way Eric watched, the way he lingered even after Kelly lost interest. He wasn't after her. He was after me. Kelly barely acknowledged me when I got home. She sat on the couch, eyes glued to the TV, though I doubt she was actually watching it. I set the camera on the coffee table in front of her. She glanced at it, uninterested. "What's that?" "Eric's." Her body stiffened, fingers curling around the edge of the cushion. She finally looked at me, eyes narrowing. "Where did you get it?" I didn't answer right away. I let the silence settle, watching as her expression shifted from confusion to unease. "Adam, what did you do?" "You don't get to ask that," I said coldly. "Not after everything you did." She opened her mouth to argue but thought better of it. Instead, she stared at the camera like it might bite her. "What's on it?" she whispered. I didn't say a word. I just leaned down, popped open the camera, and pulled up the footage. I could hear Kelly's breath hitch as the first clip played. It was from 2 weeks ago. Eric stood at the edge of our backyard, hidden by shadows, holding the camera steady. Through the lens, Kelly's silhouette moved behind the curtains of our bedroom, completely unaware. Her hand shot to her mouth, and she turned away from the screen. "Turn it off." I didn't. The next clip was worse. Eric had been inside. The camera panned slowly across our kitchen, while we were asleep upstairs. Kelly let out a soft, shaky breath. "I didn't know." "I know." And for once I believed her. This wasn't just some fling. Eric had been hunting us both. By midnight, Kelly was in bed, but I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room, scrolling through the rest of the footage. One video stood out from the rest. It wasn't long, maybe a minute, but it was recent. Eric standing at the foot of our bed, watching us sleep. I didn't remember hearing the door open. I didn't remember waking up. But the timestamp was 3 nights ago. I closed the laptop, heart hammering. Eric wasn't just playing games anymore. He'd been inside while we were home. I sat up the rest of the night watching the front door. Eric didn't show. But I knew it wouldn't be long. He'd come back, and I'd be waiting. By morning, I was running on 2 hours of sleep and caffeine. Kelly barely said a word as she left for work, eyes downcast, shoulders slumped. She was scared. Good. She should be. I stayed behind, pulling the blinds half closed and settling into the chair by the window. I didn't have to look for Eric anymore. He'd come to me. By noon, I spotted him. He was standing at the far end of the street, leaning casually against a stop sign. Sunglasses, hands in his pockets, like he had nowhere to be. But he wasn't looking at me. He was watching the house. I waited, letting him stew in it. Let him think I didn't see him. Finally, he started walking toward his car. I grabbed the camera and followed. He didn't drive far. I stayed 3 cars back, tailing him across town until he pulled into a small diner on the outskirts. I watched from the parking lot as he slid into a booth near the window, ordering coffee like he wasn't unraveling the lives of the people sitting across the street from him. I wasn't going to let him walk away this time. I stepped inside, the bell over the door ringing softly. His eyes flicked up, locking onto mine immediately. I smiled. "Mind if I sit?" He said nothing, watching me carefully as I slid into the booth across from him. For a long moment we sat in silence. Finally, Eric leaned back, folding his arms across his chest. "This feels familiar," he said, smirking. I set the camera on the table. "You left this at the warehouse." His smirk twitched, just for a second. "Don't know what you're talking about." I pressed play. The clip of him standing over our bed lit up the tiny screen between us. His smirk disappeared. "You can keep denying it, but I already made copies," I said softly. "You've got a problem, Eric, and I'm the solution." His eyes narrowed. "You threatening me?" No, I leaned forward, voice dropping. I'm promising you. Eric said nothing, but I saw the shift in his expression. He wasn't used to losing control. What do you want? He finally asked. I want you to disappear. His fingers drummed on the table. Fine. Not good enough, I snapped. I want you gone by tomorrow. No notes.
No packages.
No cute little threats under the door. If I see you after that. I left the rest unsaid. He got the message. Eric exhaled sharply, shaking his head. She wasn't worth it, you know? I smiled, sliding the camera back into my pocket. I never said this was about her. By the time I got home, the for sale sign in Eric's yard was gone. So was he. But I still didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window just in case. Waiting. Part 10, the last visit. I woke up to the sound of tires crunching gravel. It was still dark. Maybe 3 a.m. For a second I thought I imagined it until I saw the headlights. Eric's car. He wasn't gone. I slipped out of bed without waking Kelly and made my way downstairs. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the fridge. Through the peephole I watched as Eric stepped out of his car. He didn't look at the house. Instead, he walked to the side yard, disappearing out of view. I unlocked the door quietly, slipping out into the cold. I didn't say anything. I just followed. Eric was crouched by the fence, his hand reaching into the gap near the garden bed. What are you doing, Eric? I asked calmly, voice cutting through the dark. He flinched hard, head snapping toward me. For once, he didn't have that smirk.
Adam.
He stood slowly, brushing dirt from his hands. Didn't think you'd still be up. Clearly. I took another step forward. He took one back. Relax. I was just grabbing something I left behind. In my yard. He shrugged. Thought I'd save you the trouble. I didn't blink. You're still lying. Eric exhaled sharply, shaking his head. Look, man. I'm leaving. Seriously. This is the last time you'll see me. I took another step closer, the space between us shrinking. You said that before. His jaw tightened, but he didn't move. I'm done, Adam. It's over. I stared at him for a long moment. No, I said quietly. It's not. His eyes narrowed slightly. What's that supposed to mean? I leaned in, voice cold. It means if you come back here again, if I even think you're watching this house, I'll make sure you regret it. Eric's smirk returned, but this time, it didn't reach his eyes. You don't scare me. I smiled. I don't have to. I let him sit with that for a few seconds, watching the gears turn in his head. Then I stepped back, pointing to his car. Get out, Eric. He hesitated just for a second. But then he turned and walked to his car without another word. The engine rumbled to life, and I watched as he pulled away, headlights disappearing down the road. I stayed in the yard until the sun began to rise, listening to the quiet hum of the morning. Eric was gone. Thank you for listening the story to the end. Write your thoughts about it in the comments and do not forget to subscribe. See you in the next videos.